Episode of Transitioning Humanitarians Live. Hi, Viki.
Hi, Asel. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good day, and good evening, depending on where you're watching us from.
So today, Viki suggested that we talk about consistent versus intense transitioning and how they could look like, and what are the advantages of both of them, and also something that you can start doing, especially in terms of getting ready for transitioning. And what are the things you can do basically, right? So maybe Vicky, we can first start to
hmm
describe how they both could look like. I
hmm
can talk maybe about the intense part of it because
Okay.
I feel like I've experienced it.
All right.
But feel free to start with a consistent one.
Okay, great, great. So thank you for that. The reason why I thought about this subject, and this is a subject that I was interested in already in the past, it's that very often when we think about something intense, it's something bombastic, something that captures our attention, or once I read a sentence that intensity steals the limelight because it's
Mm,
usually something huge, something we notice, something
yeah.
we may be baffled by or surprised or we may admire. But in context of transitioning, or in general context in life, this is usually either result of small consistent acts or something that maybe actually is not so fantastic,
Mm,
if we look at this. So that's why I thought it would be very useful to talk about consistency versus intensity, because in the long run, if you're going to build a life that we want, I do believe, and also research shows that consistency, doing consistent steps, smaller
yes.
steps, or whatever that is more likely to give you the life that you are going forward.
Hmm.
That's
Amazing.
Mhm,
And I think for me to add to this is the intensity part of it
mhm,
is I have experienced in my own life that I found valuable to cut the ties or like umbilical cord with the employer or
mhm,
whichever the way you see it, right? So that for me
yeah,
was intense. I think the way that I experienced was intense. And I saw the value in that as
mhm,
well because I, for many of the things, I tend to be the person who says, okay, this is a decision I'm making and I'm sticking to it, no matter what, right? And I see the value in that, and I think that might be useful for some people who tend to have this feel like delaying or procrastinating
yeah,
or just like not really committing, and therefore for those type of personalities, I think like having the intense transition,
mhm,
as if to say, might be also useful. So obviously you need to know what works best for you, right? But I think what's also important for me to mention, I have done a lot of work prior to my transitioning, prior to that radical change, so to say, or making that radical decision. Prior to that, I prepared myself consistently. And that's why
yeah,
I love the consistency for so many reasons. And I love that we have that
mhm,
ability to in, and especially when it comes to building skills, especially when it comes to creating something big that always requires small, consistent acts from our side, right? Especially in times when we don't want to do this or when we feel like that's not really working, whatever it is, consistency becomes so crucial. So therefore, I'm happy that we're talking about it.
mhm.
So Vicky, if we can suggest to people like what would be the consistent acts that they could start doing in terms of getting ready for the transitioning, or maybe in the process of transitioning that would be useful to
Yeah.
build that muscle.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the question. It's a fantastic question. And one of the first things that came to my mind as you are asking the question is really look into the life. What is it that going to be beneficial for my life? And I think usually there are a few categories. First of all, are habits that I have. Are there any habits that I have that are not going to serve me? Is there a habit that, for example, you mentioned just earlier on, very, very useful habit that you have learned? If I may say, right, to be
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
organized. You
Hmm.
said it needs to be organized, and
Yeah.
that's really much more organized. And whatever is the habit, if you have a habit that you know and is not going to serve you for the for your future, this is really important to work on it, to give yourself a time and to get rid of a habit or diminish. In my case, and the second thing I was going to say is really gain skills. Before the intense moment, as Asel, you have just described, really to cutting ties with your employer,
Mhm.
which was probably necessary for you to really feel really independent.
Yeah,
You were building
yeah,
consistently certain things and you were building a
yeah,
skill. And that's very important for me. That was the same thing. I was going to coaching school, I was preparing myself so that I
yeah.
have more skills and I'm better equipped for the time when I say, okay, thank you very much. That part of my life is over. I'm starting a new one. So that's very important. And for that, you need a vision, of course, where you're going, or at least a basic orientation of where you're going. So you can build the skill. You can start preparing yourself. You can get the help. You can get the training if there is necessary. Some colleagues I see, they want to go and refresh their skills. They go to maybe refresher courses or upgrade their skills.
Yeah.
To they do another study. It's not needed, but you might want to consider it. So that's what.
Yes, absolutely. And I always want to recommend to people to use consistency for building any evidence that shows that you can do the thing you want to do. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can do with consistency is whatever you feel like you're not really good at it or um, you are not meant for it or you're not cut out for it, whatever your story of yourself
Yeah.
of this is not me or I can't be, but I would like to, right? So for instance, a lot of humanitarians tell me that, well, I'm not really a business person or
Mhm,
I can never see myself that way, even though I like the idea of being
mhm,
independent and, doing your own thing, right? So if that is your like inkling or that's what you're desiring at the same time you're telling yourself that you are actually not good at it, then you start getting curious as to where and specifically what you need to be good at it in order to start the thing you want to start. So if you feel like in the business world the marketing that scares you or the product development or whatever the part of the business that scares you that you feel like oh that's not really me,
mhm,
I always believe that we can always be the person who makes the thing we want to, and the only problem is we keep convincing ourselves
yeah.
otherwise, right? We just keep convincing ourselves, well, I'm not this, I'm not cut out for this, I'm not da da da. And we're just so good at it because of our brain's innate nature of avoiding the discomfort, right? And that's unfortunate, but at the same time, that's the brain we're working with. So therefore, I would always suggest that wherever you are going to the next phase, where whether it's promotion, whether it's going back home or whether it's private sector or a business, think of it, what is it that you feel that you are really not good at it or you cannot be, and challenge yourself and start getting good at it. So for me at the time, I felt like I'm not really the person who can be independent in
Mhm,
doing things, right? I always saw myself as being someone's
mhm,
assistant and just taking orders and then executing beautifully. This
mhm,
is how my identity was. And then as soon as I got my managerial position, I started realizing apparently I can actually manage things or
mhm,
manage people or manage
mhm,
operations, right? So and then when the identity shift, I start then thinking, okay, what is it that I'm afraid as an independent person? And how can I build my skill to get independent and what would require of
yeah.
me, right? And that's when I started working on it consistently. And things very small like, okay, if I'm independent, then I would make sure that I have my own salary, I have my
Mhm,
own thing. And how am I going to make that happen, right? So these are the skills that definitely you can start working. Whatever the evidence you need, start using consistent way of building that muscle. That's I think the highest thing you could do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
Mhm.
so that's why it's important to really to have a clear vision of where you're going and to really start preparing yourself. And as you mentioned, there is nothing wrong with also intense acts, but it's always easier that when you are equipped for intent. So we can also imagine, and I've seen situations where people resign very, very unexpectedly. And it may look like something that from the outside, it may often look like, oh, this is unexpected and what is going to happen, etc. But it could be very likely that the person has already been preparing himself, herself, themselves for this kind of transition, has been doing work on himself or preparing herself, doing trainings, or maybe really applying, etc. So from the outside, it may look intense, but actually there is a lot of consistent work behind this.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is we often, when we see intense acts, we have the illusion that they got lucky or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
they are just so talented, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people tell me that, ah, you are so talented in languages, which is so not true. But now when people see me with 7 languages, it's easy to say it, right? But all the years of working on
Yeah.
it is not something people see, and that's okay. But I think the intense transitioning has this illusion that makes us believe that things are easy and works for other people, but it doesn't for me, right? So therefore, don't use that against yourself in that way, or whatever the pace that works for you, that you should absolutely take it. But I think what I love about the intense part as well is um, it has so if we are so much like believing that we can do the thing that we want to do, or we are so ready to take the risks and we have prepared ourselves for it, then the intense way of transitioning becomes very doable. And I have done it myself in the midst of COVID, so obviously it's
Yeah.
doable. Except I think you also need to check with yourself how much of the tolerance you have for the risks that you're going to take, right? How much are you financially prepared for it? You need to also take into account financial sides. I have never done an intense transitioning, meaning I haven't just dropped the next month and said, well, I'm not going to come to work because I'm transitioning. I have never done that because I actually, saved up for a year to get ready, right? Because of big family obligations. So therefore, you can see that if you're going to go for that intense ones, yes, you can do that, but make sure that you have prepared yourself emotionally, prepared yourself mentally, financially. And the type of intense transitioning that I have seen from some of the humanitarians that might be very scary is when we do things because we are so fed up with something,
Yes.
right? Or we do things because we're just like, okay, I am done with this and I'm just like leaving. And it's a bit like abrupt way of leaving everything behind, believing that that's like that will solve all of our problems in some ways, right? And in my experience, doing things out of avoidance has never worked well. It has, if anything, worked against us. So therefore, I want to caution that you don't do that. Because in the end, what ends up often happening is that we then go to our very still lives and then realizing, oh no, what am I going to do now, right? And
Mm-hmm.
where am I going to go, and what job am I going to do?
Yeah.
And of course we can take the rebellious act of I'm going to show to them how I can do all the things, and we can do that. It just costs a lot of energy and stress that may not be necessary. So therefore, I guess the intense transitioning could also be seen in two ways. One is when we are getting ready and then
Yeah.
making that
Mm-hmm.
decision that sounds abrupt, and another way is we're not ready at all, and then we
Mm-hmm.
just pull the cord or trigger, whichever the way you call
Yeah.
it, and then we find ourselves in the midst of like nowhere, and we're now panicking and not really knowing where to go and how
Mm-hmm.
to go, and that can be saved.
Yeah, yeah. As you're describing the second situation, actually, as I'm thinking about it, again, it's a situation that is more, that is riskier. At the same time, I can imagine people being in that situation where maybe they have been for long in toxic environments, or they have
Yeah,
been very stressed out and on the verge of burnout, and they cannot take it any longer.
that is
So
true.
this is unfortunately the effect of, I don't know what is it called scientifically, the effect, but when you have a frog and you throw a frog into water, and you keep on increasing the temperatures, the frog will
Yeah,
not notice.
yeah,
And
yeah,
basically until you it's point of
yeah,
cooking, and the frog
yeah,
will be cooked. But if
yeah,
it's not that I tried, it's this is an example, but if you throw a frog into hot water, it will immediately jump out. So I
yeah,
think that's what we are trying to say. There are situations where you might just find yourself in this, and then of course you will hopefully find some sort of a support. But also bear in mind that it's better to be aware of these situations that are sort of increasing the temperature gradually, where you
yeah,
cannot stand the situation any longer. So that's why the checking with yourself is important, so that you're
yeah,
not forced to do this intense transitioning out without any preparation, without any thought, that you're basically forced out of it.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, we're also now witnessing situations that we talked about where humanitarians are being laid off, where they didn't really think that they would be, right? And that would be also described somewhat intense transitioning for them, especially
Yes.
when they don't feel prepared for it and they feel like they don't have any other options and it's
Yeah.
too late for other options, right? So this is probably another examples of intense transitioning that's not easy. In such cases, the best that we can recommend is, of course, seek help if you can. You have hopefully your friends and other network that you can rely on. But also, I think whatever that situation is that you are feeling like you are transitioning, I think like it's easy to feel lost, or it's easy to feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And being in this panic mode and anxious mode and worry mode. And in those moments, I think it's important that to remind to ourselves that we can change our situation, whichever the circumstance is. And
Yeah.
we have the power to change that. And I think that's something that I cannot stress enough. And as long as we keep feeling lost and we keep telling ourselves that it's a situation that we can't get out of and this is just how doomed and gloom, then obviously we're
Mhm.
going to create even more fear for
Yeah.
ourselves, right? So therefore, in that moment, the best thing that you can do is like process a lot of those emotions, calming yourself, and then going to this place of trust to say, okay, what is it that I'm going to do now?
Yeah.
The situation is what it is. Accepting is something that many people don't like to hear,
Hmm.
but that's what
Yeah.
will help us in that moment to say accepting does not mean understanding or agreeing with them, but accepting this is where I am currently and what am I going to do from here onwards instead of keep feeling in this turmoil and drama that we oftentimes find ourselves in those situations.
Yeah.
And I think drama is maybe unavoidable in some ways, but the way that I always deal with drama is I just keep observing until my brain calms down, right? So the way that I think about drama is like it's like this
Hmm.
squirrely thing that's happening in my brain. I just sit and observe it. And
Hmm.
as soon as I start observing it, my brain, like my body calms down
Yeah.
and then I start doing something about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anything, Vicky, we mentioned in this consistent versus intense transitioning?
I think maybe I would say don't judge yourself, or don't be harsh on
Yeah,
yourself when you are wherever you find yourself.
yeah,
It's okay, and as you say, it's one of the most important things is just to accept where you are right now, and then seek the way out, the best, or the seek the way forward rather,
yeah.
so that you build the life that you really wanted.
Yes, and I always think of it like whatever the difficult situation, I want to believe that I can handle it, right? That's something that I just choose to believe, even though probably many situations where it was not the case, but I always want to choose to believe that I can handle it. So how am I going to handle whatever the worst situation that I feel that I am in, and how do I get out of it? And I think that's a skill that we can all build as well, is getting out of this difficult situations, setback or challenging situations, right? We can always build a muscle to get out of them. And the more we do that, the more we start understanding that, well, we can solve pretty much anything except death, like some people say.
Yeah.
So, so that's why I really would love to suggest to you to the consistency that you want to build. It could be around whatever the challenge you have currently. How can you solve it in a way that makes you feel more powerful instead of feeling emotionally drained or
Mhm.
anything? So these are the suggestions. If you need any help, let us know. We would love to help you get through this, whichever the way to get to, yeah, transitioning and living the life you want. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Asel. And yeah, get in touch if you need coaching or if you need follow up on this subject.
Absolutely. So see you next week.
See you
Have
next
an
week.
amazing week.